Today on Susan's in the Garden. Have you tried to grow broccoli and other cabbage family crops only to have them be obliterated by all sorts of bugs? I'll show you how to plant broccoli. I'll discuss the types of insects that can be a problem for these crops and easy ways to keep them safe from damaging insects. Today's video will be a game changer for you. Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. My husband Bill and I live in Spokane, Washington, where the hardiness zone ranges from 5B to 6A. I'm an organic gardener and I want you to be successful at growing wonderful bug-free produce. Today I'm going to focus on broccoli, but the information that I share with you applies to all cabbage family crops. Cabbage family crops include arugula, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, pak choi, radishes, rutabagas, and turnips. This is the raised bed I'm going to grow broccoli in this year. I've already added in some organic composted chicken manure to the soil, and that is full of nitrogen, which really helps cabbage family crops thrive. If you're wondering which variety I'm growing, this is Belstar. It's my third year of growing it, and I am so sold on this variety because it is incredibly productive. Now, I started the plants indoors from seed on March 9th. And here we are at the middle of April, which is perfect. With cabbage family crops, they do best if you plant them while the temperatures are cool, typically about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. I've got 8 seedlings all together, and I'm going to plant them in a zigzag pattern just to give them a little bit of extra room to grow. Broccoli plants, and especially Belstar, grow quite large, so I want to give them as much room as possible. Now, when you are transplanting a seedling, you never want to pull them out by their stalk. That damages the cells in the stems, and that makes it very hard for the plants to move moisture and nutrients. So what I'm doing, because these pots have large holes in the bottom, is I'm just going to push them up from the bottom. There we go. And if they're a little floppy, I'll give them a stake to help them along until they're stronger. But look at that nice root system. I'm planting them at the same depth as they were in the pot. And then I'm going to press the soil around them so that I know there's no air pockets and the soil is making good contact with the roots. There's one. Now I'm going to water them in, and that's partly to reduce any type of stress that the plants underwent when being transplanted. It's also to help fill in any air pockets around the root system. And I'm also going to give them some diluted Alaska fish fertilizer, which is high in nitrogen, and that is exactly what broccoli loves. I love eating broccoli and all kinds of cabbage family crops, but unfortunately there are certain insects that love to eat them too. That is a real problem. Fortunately, I have figured out how to thwart them. So the main insects that we deal with here are slugs, aphids, and cabbage worms. So let's start with slugs because that is actually the next step in planting the broccoli. Slugs are mostly nocturnal, which means they're active at night. They are attracted to moisture, whether from rain, overwatering, or a leaky faucet. Boy, do they love munching on plant leaves, especially those of cabbage family crops. I wish I could tell you that row covers will keep slugs away from your crops. The problem is that they can be in the soil already or hiding somewhere inside your garden bed. Here are 4 potential ways to control them. There's an organic slug bait called Sluggo. The active ingredient is iron phosphate, which is a natural substance. Just sprinkle it on the soil surface as recommended on the label. You don't want to use non-organic slug baits because they contain metaldehyde, which is toxic to kids and pets. That's not good. You can make a beer trap. I know it sounds crazy, but slugs are attracted to the smell of yeast in beer. Just sink an empty cat food or tuna can into the soil so the lip of the can is at the soil surface. Pour in about an inch of beer. The slugs will smell it and reach over the edge of the can to get some, fall in, and drown. Go out at night with a flashlight, especially after it rains. Look for slugs and collect them in a container that you can toss in the trash. Now here is my favorite way for keeping slugs away from our plants. The thing is that the skin of slugs and their antennae react electrically with copper. They want nothing to do with it. Now some folks will put copper on the rim of their beds or containers, and that keeps the slugs away and snails. But what we did a few years ago is we took some old drain pipe, it's plastic, it's 3 inches in diameter, and Bill cut them into 1.5 inch tall pieces. And then we bought some Corey's slug and snail copper tape, which is super easy to find in garden centers and online. We wrapped it around the outer perimeter of these rings, and then we slipped the rings over the plants. Now, the thing is, you want to do this while your seedlings are very young and you don't want any of the foliage touching the soil. So let me put it on first and I'll explain why that's important. Okay, so here's that copper barrier. The slugs will not want to touch it or be near it at all. But this is what I like to call an on-ramp. If a slug is over here, they're going to say, hey, I can just go right up on that leaf and get to the plant and eat all kinds of stuff. So what I do at planting time is I clip off anything that is touching the soil on the outside. So I'll remove this. But having this in direct contact with the soil all the way around works great at keeping slugs away from the plants. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you want to check your plants during the growing season, which you'll be doing anyway. But if you see that a new leaf has come down and it's getting ready to touch the soil or is touching the soil, snip it off. Now some folks have asked me, how long does this copper tape last on the outsides of the rings? This has been working great for us for quite a few years. And I was asking Bill about it the other day, and he said that it's not something where you have to clean off the exterior of the tape or put on new tape. It's working just fine. I think everyone knows what aphids look like, but here's a photo for you. They suck the juices out of the plants and reproduce like nobody's business. What's really upsetting is that the females are born pregnant and they give live birth to the babies. There are different species of cabbage worms that are either the larvae of butterflies or moths. They lay eggs on the leaves, which hatch into hungry caterpillars. Boy, do they make a mess of things. Plus, there's nothing less appetizing than steaming some broccoli or cauliflower only to see some worms floating in the pot. Yuck. So what's the solution to aphids and cabbage worms? Row cover. There are 2 different types that I use regularly and recommend. The concept is to cover your seeds or seedlings as soon as you plant them. Do not wait. The cover acts as a physical barrier to keep those bugs away. The main reason this works is because cabbage family crops don't need to be pollinated, so the plants don't need to be accessible to the pollinators. This is floating row cover, and I have used it in our garden for years. It's a lightweight woven fabric that lets sunlight through it. If it were to rain, the rain will go through it. But again, it acts as a physical barrier to keep certain insects away. Now this is in a different area of our garden, as you probably noticed, and it's actually over our carrot bed. And that's just because we have a lot of birds in the garden, and I want to protect those tiny carrot seedlings while they're young and tasty to birds. Once they're up about 2 or 3 inches, the birds don't really bother them. So right now, it's a physical barrier to keep the birds away. I have used it over Swiss chard beets and spinach, and that's because they get leaf miners, which are flies that lay eggs. The maggots ruin the leaves, and they are really a problem. Generally speaking, I don't need floating row cover over other crops in the garden, but it's a very handy thing to have around. You can see I've got it on some hoops just to keep it off of the plants, and it works great. I also wanted to mention that floating row cover comes in different weights. So this is the lightest weight. It lets in the most sunlight. And again, I'm basically using it as a physical barrier. However, there are heavier weights, sort of a mid-weight and then a heavyweight one, and that is really for frost protection. But the thing you need to know with the heavier weights is that they do not let as much light pass through it. It's quite dramatic. But if you're going to have a surprise frost, it's very handy to have on hand. This does give a little bit of frost protection, but not much. Now, if you've been following me for the past couple of years, you know that this is my very favorite row cover. It is agricultural insect netting, and I love it because you can see right through it. So I can see how plants are doing, if they need to be harvested and so on, without having to lift the cover. We made this as a hinged row cover, which is pretty slick, and that's a do-it-yourself project in my book, The Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook. But the other thing is it's very durable. It's like a tiny screen, and I have not even had aphids, as tiny as they are, get through that screen. So this is fantastic, and this is what I like to use for broccoli because, again, it's generally speaking a cool season crop, at least for starting them, and I want them to get as much air circulation as possible so they don't get too hot under something like a floating row cover. Now, I don't have a hinged cover that I think is quite tall enough for going over broccoli plants because, again, those bellstar plants just grow huge. So I'm going to show you what I'm using that isn't a hinged raised bed cover, but works just as well. Now you'll notice that on the outsides of all of our raised beds, with the exception of the raspberry bed in the background, we've got pieces of PVC pipe that have been clamped to the outsides of the beds. And that is because we rotate our crops every year, and we wanted to make it so it was always easy to put hoops over a crop no matter where it was planted in the garden. So that's why those are there. Now, because I really wanted to have tall hoops on the broccoli bed, I'm doing something a little different this year. Yesterday, Bill and I cut some 18-inch lengths of electrical metal conduit. I'm putting them into the PVC pipes. And then I'll show you the type of hoops I'm using for this bed. So the hoops I'm going to use are made from 1-inch black poly sprinkler pipe, which is pretty easy to find and fairly inexpensive. And all I'm going to do is push the pipe over the EMT. And that is a tall hoop. Those are definitely not going anywhere. One other thing I wanted to address is that a lot of folks will ask me, how do you know how long to cut the hoops? Well, if you have a roll of this black plastic poly sprinkler pipe, you can just take the end of the roll and just put it how you want it to be over the bed and measure what that distance is and go from there. Now, some folks might make them a little bit taller so that they can push them down into the soil in the bed. So that's another option. Now it's time for me to put the agricultural insect netting over the hoops. And I also get questions about, how do I know how large of a piece to buy? Same deal. Use a tape measure and measure from the ground, and actually a few inches beyond that, up and over what your hoops are going to be, and then down on the ground on the other side, because you want to weight down the outer perimeter so it won't blow off and so something can't get in underneath the edge. I want to make sure there's enough to weight down on each end as well. Now you can see that I have weighted down the outer perimeter of the netting with boards. Thank goodness for spare boards, right? And I love how I can see exactly how the plants are doing without having to lift the cover. If it rains, rain will go through it. Of course, we've got our drip irrigation system inside the bed, so that makes it even easier. So you've got your seedlings planted and they're protected from insects. Now what? You want to water them on a regular basis so the soil is lightly moist. For the first month, give them some nitrogen fertilizer every couple of weeks. When the plants form heads, be sure to harvest them at the right time. You want to harvest them while they're still firm, and it's a little bit of a trick, but right before they start softening up a little bit. You definitely do not want to harvest them when they are flowering, because that's past its prime. And the more regularly you harvest the heads when they're ready, the more the plants will produce. You want to cut the heads off just below the full head. Don't forget about my best-selling book, The Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook, which is all about dealing with vegetable garden insects organically and being able to recognize the many wonderful beneficial insects we have in our gardens and attract even more to them. I also wanted to remind you that on my website, susansinthegarden.com, I have the special Grow Vegetables section. It is a guide to everything you need to know about growing vegetables, and if you scroll down on the page, you'll come to a chart, and all of the ones that are links go to guides on growing these specific vegetable crops. I've been hearing rave reviews about it so far, and this is a great resource for everyone to use. Okay, that's everything you need to know. I hope this video will give you confidence to start growing broccoli and other cabbage family crops again. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.